Somewhere out there, there's an all-white town. Maybe they're having a city council meeting. They're talking about possible development of a piece of land owned by the same people who already own a manufacturing plant near the town. They want to expand their manufacturing operation. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, ooh, so exciting. City council meetings are known for being very exciting. That being said, in this particular case, the manufacturing plant has been caught improperly disposing of waste before, leading to ground pollution on the plant site. And this other piece of land that they'd want to develop has a seasonal creek that grows through it. So that feeds into the nearby river. So there are some farmers, ranchers, and fishermen that are concerned about allowing these people who have cut corners in the past to develop this piece of land that is more connected. See how exciting that is? But wait, there's more. After they talk about that, maybe they'll talk about funding for the local library or theater. And then they'll address some new road that is getting washed out in the recent rain. Maybe the city council is going to try and contact the engineer who worked on it to see what the problem is. Maybe the culvert was installed improperly or too small of a culvert. Washed out roads can be unsafe. Wow. See, politics is exciting and glamorous. But these things, the washed out road, the local library, commercial and industrial expansions, and choosing contractors on who works on which civic projects. These things do matter. We do need to find some way to get them handled. It's just a matter of life, even if it's not necessarily sexy or exhilarating. You do want safe roads, right? But wait, what's happening in city council meetings across the country now? How about someplace diverse? What might they be talking about in Baltimore, or Detroit, or Memphis? Memphis 24 this year reported the honeymoon ended 20 minutes into first Memphis City Council meeting. It was about race.
Our top story at 6 now is a Memphis City Councilwoman getting attention for calling out Mayor Jim Strickland for not having enough minorities at the top. The mayor says that's just not true.
The mayor also says he's hired more minority directors than his African-American predecessor, A.C. Wharton.
That police thing, that's what Warren and Strickland agree on. More are needed on the streets.
Other cities are out there recruiting big time, and I'm like Penny Hardaway. I'm hitting the streets hard, looking for the best and brightest to be able to serve, be the best in blue. And it's tough because it's a competitive market, but we're trying to stay one step ahead.
All of the people who helped Mayor Strickland in his first term were coming back to be reappointed, including Chief Operating Officer Doug McGowan, the second in command at City Hall. 8 of the returning directors are minorities, 7 are not. Councilwoman Cheyenne Johnson says not good enough. She wants an African-American in a top position.
We would like to see a little bit more African-American representation at the top.
Did you hear how in that clip the mayor was talking about the challenges in recruiting new police officers for his city? He's trying to keep it safe. Sorry, Mayor. We've got more important things to discuss. Race. When a town becomes diversified, once the non-white population becomes 10% or 20 or 30% of a town, or when your entire country starts to experience a changing demographic, things really do start to change on all levels. All of a sudden, we need to start talking about systemic inequality in a culture of normative whiteness. Once a certain area of town becomes non-white enough, if any white people try and move in, it might be decried as gentrification. Protests and activism ensues. In an all-white town, if there's a murder, it's a tragedy. In a diverse town, it's a tragedy, followed by protests, and potentially leading to riots and even more violence. If you want to talk about improving the police force and reducing crime, Mayor, that can wait. We need to talk about minority representation. Imagine you went out and voted. You got your guy elected. Finally, my guy can get in there and change those things that I've really felt strongly about. Maybe crime's too high and he can fix it. Oh, sorry, your guy's the wrong race, and he didn't bring enough of the right race to help him. We're going to have a discussion about this before we can tackle more marginal concerns that you have, like crime. Now, don't get me wrong, politics does still go on, right? It just gets delayed and changed. Although sometimes we can't even talk about certain topics anymore. Oh no, they're off limits. It used to be your country was white, and the immigrants were also white. So when immigration outpaced the building of new houses, apartments, and condos, we could have a serious conversations about rising housing costs, right? Housing's just like anything else, supply and demand. And we have modern building codes and approval processes. So building new housing sometimes is a slow process. If supply is slowly growing, but demand is very quickly growing, it can all of a sudden become quite expensive to live. So you might need to have a conversation about slowing or stopping immigration to let the housing market catch back up. Oh, but now that the immigrants are largely not white, sorry, you don't get to talk about that anymore. If you try, they'll say, racist. Oh, looks like your politics is off limits because you got called the R word. And there's the same deal with employment. The labor market is also a market. It is also subject to supply and demand. When you bring in a bunch of new laborers, whether you do it legally or illegally, you can suppress wages because if you increase the supply but haven't changed the demand. It will start to adjust over time, but not right away. If you want to halt immigration, to stop the suppression of wages, or you want to improve employment levels, well, are you sure you're allowed to discuss that? Oh, wait. Hey, folks, I'm being told that we are allowed to talk about wages and unemployment again.
Black unemployment is the best it's ever been in recorded history.
Unemployment for Hispanics hit an all-time record low in June, and new polls showing that Trump's approval rating among Hispanics rising rapidly.
And something I'm very proud of, African American unemployment stands at the lowest rate ever recorded. And Hispanic American unemployment has also reached the lowest levels in history.
Oh, okay. I see. We're allowed to talk about their wages and their unemployment, not ours. Some older whites will look back at their childhood and they'll say, you know what, here it didn't used to be like this. And they're talking about their town or wherever they lived. Here we used to get along, but we weren't 100% white back then. And right, it's true, their town or whatever used to be 2% non-white or 5% non-white, and they did genuinely enjoy riding their bikes or skipping rocks with the neighbor kids, which included blacks or whatever. That's normal. But when they were a kid with a few non-whites around, there was that city over there with a much higher percentage of non-whites, and they were experiencing riots. Buildings were being burnt down. Race had taken center stage over there, and life was grinding to a halt. The pre-political situation had fully taken hold. The only difference between here and there was how far that demographic change had gone. Here, this town was on the same path, the path towards the pre-political. But now, here is as bad as there used to be. There's enough non-whites. It's time for them to push for their interests their way. And remember, this is not about equality. This isn't about compromise. And you've seen that. The old timer, the old white person will say something like, oh, well, if they wanted equality, they would support everyone getting a fair shot. They wouldn't support racial quotas, forcing people to hire a certain number of people. And you know what? That's right, old timer. If they really did care about equality, they would say things like, best man for the job, no matter what race. Let's put race behind us. But they don't say that because that's not what they want. You can't negotiate for equality when your negotiation partner wants more than equality. They want to win. In an all-Japanese town in Japan, they don't talk about whether the Japanese way of life is xenophobic. They don't talk about normative Japaneseness. They just talk about maintenance to the local parks, public transport schedules, whatever sort of needs they have. In Africa, there's a bunch of booming, totally black African towns, and they're reviewing plans for a new electrical transformer. They are anticipating the growing additional power needs that they're going to have in the future. They're not mired in the pre-political. It's only when you start pushing different people together in one space that all of a sudden you need to put issues, these real issues, aside and say, hey, you didn't put enough of the right race on the city council. Your concerns about rising murder rates is just going to have to wait a second while we deal with more pressing pre-political issues. Now, I get it. You have ideas. You have political ideas, maybe big ones. You want to change the banking system. You don't like fractional reserve lending. Maybe you don't like fiat money. You're going to bring us back to the gold standard. Or maybe you just want to overhaul our healthcare system, or the education system, or even small things, changes to public transport. And you know what? I can't wait to hear about all the ideas you have once we're finished with all this pre-political stuff. Once we're finished talking about race, and we won't ever be finished talking about race as long as we're stuck here all living together. Once we're finished, you might come up with something really neat, and I can't wait to hear it. But until that day comes, we are pre-political. Although I did mention that some politics goes on, so maybe you could find a way to get your plans through. You had a plan about overhauling the education system, right? Well, you can go ahead and bring that to the Minority Action Committee so they can review it. And maybe they'll have to refocus the effort on more equitable service to disprivileged groups. It might not be exactly what you were hoping for, but, maybe you can kind of do some of it, a little. And if you're watching this video and you are convinced that someday we'll push past these race issues, even though it's never been done before, and we'll be able to get onto the real politics, well, I would like to hear your argument for that. Why don't you check out my video, White Guilt is a Joke? See what I say there, and then answer my basic question for people who feel that way. How can we get those people to stop acting like themselves and to start acting like us? Because it's not happening on its own.